One night there was a launching at a yacht club up here in Urbana, Virginia. The launching party was pretty good. I mean, there were people jumping off of the balconies into the river and coming up covered with mud. And I was dancing with the girls and having a hell of a good time. And so on the way out from the party, we were walking down the dock. And Brian Schmidt backed me up against the pump-out station under a light and said, You got a story to tell, and you're the only one that tells it. And that's when the Outrigged project really got kicked off. This Outrigged project began at that moment up against the pump-out station. Let's say all the way from the lunatic fringe to the most iconic yachts on the planet, the America's Cup racers. Hello, it's Jim Brown here, and thanks to you for being there. This is another of my Outrigged Capercasts, and this time I want to talk about the Outrigged project. I knew that I was one of the last of the Mohicans. About the last guy of the early multi-hull pioneers that was still standing.
Does it bring back memories?
What? I can't hear you.
Does it bring back memories?
Oh, yeah, sure, of course. Yeah.
Woody Brown, and his story is the keystone in the arc of modern seafaring lore.
Right down, see? Like, hey, you can't do that. You've got to hold it, the crew. It's all right.
Well, that's why it flipped over.
Yeah, we hit a gust of wind and over it went, see?
I had a chance to go to Hawaii in 2004 and spend some time with Woody. We all wanted to take Woody Brown out for one more boat ride. We got Woody down through a beachfront park there at Lahaina, Maui, across the beach, into a dinghy, out over the surf, and up alongside the namesake to his original Mauna Kea.
See, I made the deck streamlined too. See how right here the deck is a nice curve, so there was no windage as well as fast in the water.
At the height of one gust, he hollers, "Now we're all going swimming!" We decide to jive, which can be a risky maneuver under these conditions, and Woody hollers, "Hey, wait till we catch a big wave and then jive!" And so we do that. The boat gets going so fast that it's actually overtaking the wind, and the jive is very gentle. And then we mosey inside the wind line to just luxuriate in the lee of this high and verdant island. He and I had met before, some 50 years before, when he and his crew of 2 Hawaiian guys had taken me for that very formative run of Waikiki. I tried to tell him how profoundly he had shaped my life, and I suppose he understood, but he preferred to wax about, living life, doing what you love, and understanding the spiritual meaning of aloha. Well, Woody died 2 years later in peace at the age of 96. And in my mind, he is the true originator, progenitor of the modern seafaring watercraft.
Jim Brown is the Nathaniel Harrishoff of multi-hull designers. This guy has been around since the beginning of the modern multi-hull in California and is one of the coolest cats I've ever met.
Hey, this is Don Kogut. He's the guy that introduced me to Arthur Piver. And here he is in his bathrobe at about 11 o'clock in the morning after we've been drinking coffee since dawn, telling lies to each other. And he was with me when we were standing on the old ferry dock downtown Sausalito, and Arthur Piver came by in his first little frolic, 16-foot claptrap boat that cost him $200, and I watched him sail out into what they call Hurricane Gulch and take off like a paper dart. I was hooked from then on. Dick Newick, it must have been about 1978, we were delivering Rogue Wave, his 60-foot ocean racing masterpiece built by the Goujon brothers for Phil Weld. We were way out in the Gulf Stream someplace, romping along at night, and the wind kept coming up and kept coming up. I was on the helm, everybody else was asleep. Finally, I figured we had to reduce sail. I was really having difficulty steering. And so I knocked on the hatch to the stern castle where Dick was asleep, and I pushed the hatch open. So he stuck his head up and he looked around and he said, "Oh, I think it's going along all right. We could use some more sail. Call me if the weather moderates." Went back down to bed. Well, you know, there's a lot of stories about James Swarum that refer to his ocean-sized libido. And one day, Scott Brown and I were up in Boston. We were down in the catacombs of Multi-Hull's magazine, where Ava Burgess, who was the co-editor at the time, she dragged a photograph out of a drawer of her desk and showed it to us. There was a great black and white photograph of James sitting on the stern of one of his catamarans sailing along, and he had a great big fishing rod and a great big fish, actually a shark. And he was posing with this thing in the nude. And Ava showed us this picture and turned it over, and I'll be darned, it was a postcard. It had been sent to Ava through the mail. Now, it seems to me that the materials and technology that resulted from World War II have caused what I call an absolute sea change in marine architecture, which may be with us for generations to come. And when I contemplate the tremendous advances in seafaring that I've personally witnessed over just the last 60 or 70 years, and then try to fantasize on what seafaring will be like in another 60 or 70 years, I mean, the projection is astounding. What really is a watercraft anyway? I mean, besides a shell, a vessel of some sort that makes a hole of a certain shape in the surface of the sea, a boat is so nearly alive, so responsive to its environment, that to some of us at least, it can acquire almost that divine presence on the face of the earth as have all living things. I had a look at this boat. I couldn't believe my eyes. It was the craziest thing I'd ever seen. It was a double outrigger canoe with a little platform on it. The main hull looked like a much too skinny boat. And the floats looked like, I don't know, coffins for big snakes. The first gust that caught that little boat, it went off like a rocket into the fog. I'll never forget it. It reminded me of throwing a really good paper airplane, you know. It goes back to that overwhelming feeling I had as a young man when I realized that that kind of freedom is actually available. Having the incredible freedom to be able to move around and just go to these different places. You could take along your own friends and your own food and your own culture. And with your own seagoing sailboat, you can go anywhere. It's almost like space travel. And you're doing it with this contraption that you've whacked out in your own backyard. And that particular notion was always the theme of my design work. I wanted to design boats for people like me. And I suppose I should confess that everything I ever designed, I probably designed for myself. My clients were not coming to me and telling me what they wanted. They were asking me, what do I need? And because I had some sea time, I figured I was in a position to tell them what they needed. And yet it was audacious, absolutely unconscionable for me to assume that I could draw boats for other people to go do the same thing. Its impetus, the way it got going, there was a lot of audaciousness in it. It was brazen what we did. A lot of people have wondered why the multi-hull in the first place. There's no other vessel type that can navigate in shallow water and still exhibit these splendid seakeeping properties offshore. The multi-hulls are the greatest thing you can be on in a real seaway. They're not just the most comfortable and the fastest. They're the safest, because they cannot sink. And these boats were an aspect of the counterculture because they were anti-yachts. This whole thing happened outside of the yacht clubs. It had nothing to do with traditional elitist sailing. And we identified with that because it was a part of the times. It was the Berkeley boys trying to dismount the government. It was the musical Hair. It was the Governor Ronald Reagan sending the National Guard into Berkeley to kick the students out of the university. It was a time of real foment in this country. Boy, it was the riots and the killings at Kent State. We were definitely renegades, and we loved it. We wanted to really stick it to our Corinthian comrades in the yacht clubs. Often we could do that on the water by showing them our heels. You know, they'd be out there on a Sunday with maybe 50 boats sailing around the buoys in a nice race, and we would go steaming through with our boat loaded with dogs and kids and a hamburger grill going and smoke wafting out across the race course. We didn't even have to try to race. It was no comparison, apples and oranges. It was back in about 1968, and boy, we really needed the money. They paid cash. Yeah, Joanna and I were living in this great old house on 7th Avenue right in the heart of Santa Cruz there, just a few blocks from the harbor. We were just starting to crack the nut on our design business, and we were really broke. And when these folks handed me all this cash, I don't know, it was $300 or $400. It was a fortune to us at the time. I came home and sort of tossed it all over Joanna's lap. She'd been singing that old jazz song, "Get out of here and get me some money too." We were selling boat building plans to individual owner builders, and that was a successful business in the 60s and 70s. Because there were essentially no manufactured multi-hulls available. In some cases, the best way to get yourself a good multi-hull was to build it yourself. So Joanna and I were able to accumulate enough money to build our own boat, and we gave away or sold everything we had and climbed into the boat with our kids in 1972 and flee. We fled from California. Looking back on it, it was kind of crazy, but there was no alternative for us. We had decided that we were going to go and experience that level of freedom. All of a sudden, the four of us were thrown into a living space that was maybe as big as a microbus. So we just bugged out and sailed on down the western seaboard of Mexico and Central America, through the Panama Canal, over to South America a bit, up through the Caribbean, to the east coast of the United States, where we arrived in Virginia 3 years later. Our boys are now in their middle 50s, and sometimes when we get together, we still talk about the trip. We'll never get over it. When it comes to the creative part of it, to decide what to design, what to lay down on the page, you're so preoccupied with it that there's nothing else in the world. That's all there is. And then you take that drawing out into the shop and build your own boat from that page. And then take your wife and children seafaring in that creation. That's taking the whole trip, man. That's the whole boating trip right there. And I've often thought that the ancient Micronesians and Polynesians and island Asians really had it figured out. The anthropologists tell us that many of these early multi-hulls were actually created as escape vehicles, to escape out into the Pacific Islands and distribute themselves over a wider area of Earth than any other race at the time. Maybe back in the 60s and 70s, there was the opportunity to find that certain sanctuary somewhere that must exist. If you had your own boat, you could go look for it. A lot of us who built our own boats back then were really concerned about, nuclear incineration and democracy devolving into autocracy.
So what did it take for this multi-hull
down to the essence of it here, and I must say that there's a fair bit of bummer material in it. The trouble is that we had fiascos like you wouldn't believe. These early boats were real contraptions. And there were capsizes, lives lost, my gosh, collisions. People would come in with big chunks taken out of their boat by commercial vessels and rigs falling over the side. Like there was the guy that fell into his boat and broke his back. Bob and Ann Stegg sailed their boat all the way to Sydney, Australia on the way around the world, and the thing burned up in the harbor because of a kerosene refrigerator. They were almost guinea pigs, almost sacrificial. I could never tell whether they were going to make it or not. They would buy a set of plans from me, and the next thing I'd get a postcard from them from some place like Pango Pango. It was quite possible for these inexperienced people who had no sea time whatsoever, to go and whack out their own seafaring sailboat in their backyards and then shove off looking for a great romantic adventure and end up with having their minds fried. There was a lot of life in it and some death in it, and believe me, I could tell you stories like that till the cows come home. And the stories of those lives is really a rich nautical tradition. But I guess because historians tend to neglect the recent past, I've been concerned this incredible rich heritage was going to be lost, because it was that can-do spirit of the time. Get it on. I think perhaps the net effect of that kind of sailing is that you tend to come home with a far better understanding of how the world really works.